Hey guys, tonight we wake before the sun has even considered rising, in a city that smells faintly of river mud, warm clay, and yesterday's cooking fires. You lie on a woven reed mat inside a modest mudbrick house, the air already thick, even at this hour, with the promise of Mesopotamian heat. Somewhere beyond the wall, a donkey brays with all the elegance of a broken trumpet, and you are reminded that ancient life comes with surround sound. You blink into the darkness and listen to the low, steady rush of the Euphrates sliding past the city's edge. This is one of the great arteries of the world, the river that feeds fields of barley and dates, the river that helped cradle cities like Uruk and Babylon into existence thousands of years ago. Long before alarm clocks, this river is your morning notification system. It never snoozes. You stretch, already aware of your responsibility. You are an Ashipu, a Mesopotamian exorcist, ritual specialist, healer of afflictions seen and unseen. If someone wakes with nightmares, trembling limbs, or a mysterious fever, they may very well send for you. You deal in incantations, in ritual purity, in the careful recitation of words etched into clay tablets in neat rows of cuneiform. You probably won't survive this career without a healthy respect for both demons and disappointed clients. Before anything else, you sit upright and murmur a short prayer to Shamash, the sun god who will soon climb into the sky and illuminate every dusty alley and temple courtyard. In mainstream history, we know that Mesopotamians believed illness could be caused by angry gods or malevolent spirits, and your entire profession is built around identifying which supernatural being might be responsible. Historians still argue whether people truly believed every sickness was demonic, or whether some practitioners quietly suspected more natural causes, but kept that to themselves. You, for now, keep your thoughts respectfully ambiguous. You rise and step outside into the cool pre-dawn air. The sky is a deep indigo, brushed with the faintest silver along the horizon. You carry a small clay vessel and make your way toward the riverbank. Purification comes first. Ritual cleanliness is not just about hygiene, it is about cosmic order. You kneel at the Euphrates, dip your hands into the silty water, and let it run over your fingers. It is surprisingly cold, a sharp reminder that you are awake and alive and very much part of this landscape. You wash your hands, your face, and finally your mouth, careful not to swallow too much of the river. Mesopotamian cities had drainage systems and even early forms of sanitation, but let's just say you wouldn't bottle this water and sell it as luxury spring water. A small joke to yourself helps. If the demons don't get you, the microbes might. But fortunately, you don't yet have a word for microbes. Back inside, you light a small oil lamp. Its flame flickers against the mud brick walls, illuminating your tools laid out on a low wooden table. There are clay tablets inscribed with incantations from the series known in later scholarship as maklu, a collection of anti-witchcraft rituals. There are small figurines of clay, some shaped vaguely like human forms, that you will use to symbolically transfer illness or curse away from your clients. There is a pouch of herbs, juniper, tamarisk, and other plants whose scents are sharp and grounding. You inspect each item carefully. The tablets are your most precious possessions. Writing in cuneiform is a skill that took years to master, and not everyone can read the dense wedge-shaped impressions pressed into clay. You remember your apprenticeship in the temple school, hunched over damp tablets, stylus in hand, copying signs until your wrist ached. Being an Ashipu requires literacy, and literacy is power. In a world where most people cannot read, you carry entire conversations with the divine in baked earth. A quirky detail that would make modern historians smile: some incantations are so specific they read like ancient customer service scripts. If a man's head aches and he sees strange lights, one might begin, followed by precise instructions for fumigation and prayer. You can almost imagine a checklist. Step 1, light juniper. Step 2, chant 3 times. Step 3, hope for the best. You grind a pinch of herbs in a small stone mortar, releasing a fragrant cloud that fills the room. The scent is resinous, almost sweet, and it clings to your hair and clothes. Smell is important. It signals to any watching spirit that you mean business. You tie a simple linen band around your head and adjust your robe, making sure it falls neatly. Presentation matters. If you look like you just rolled out of bed, because you did, confidence may falter. As the first rays of sunlight slip over the horizon, the city awakens. From beyond your doorway comes the sound of women grinding grain, the rhythmic scrape of stone on stone. A child laughs. Somewhere, a pot shatters and is followed by a very human sigh. Life continues, demons or not. You step out into the narrow street, the ground packed hard from countless sandaled feet. The ziggurat in the distance looms against the brightening sky, its tiered silhouette a reminder of the gods' ever-present watch. These massive temple towers were real architectural feats of their time, rising above the flat plain like man-made mountains. You offer a brief bow in that direction. Better to stay on good terms with the divine management. Today will likely bring a summons. It always does. Perhaps a farmer who believes a rival has cursed his livestock. Perhaps a mother worried about her child's night terrors. You don't yet know, but you feel the weight of your calling settle around your shoulders like your robe. Familiar, slightly heavy, and oddly comforting. You take one more steady breath of the warming air, tasting dust and river and the faint smoke of breakfast fires. The sun climbs higher, and with it, your responsibilities. Somewhere in this city, someone is already whispering your name, hoping you can stand between them and whatever unseen force troubles their sleep. And so, you begin your day, walking toward the heart of the city, tools prepared, mind steady, ready to diagnose not just sickness of the body, but disturbances of fate itself. You move deeper into the waking city, and as your sandals brush against the dust of the street, your mind drifts, just slightly, back to the long years that shaped you into what you are now. Because you were not born in Ashipu. No one emerges from the womb already holding a clay tablet and muttering incantations. This took training, discipline, and more than a few cramped fingers. You remember being a boy in the temple school, the Eduba, the tablet house. The room smelled perpetually of damp clay and sweat, and the floor was littered with discarded practice tablets bearing crooked cuneiform signs. Writing in Mesopotamia is not an alphabet, but a complex system of wedge-shaped impressions pressed into clay with a reed stylus. There are hundreds of signs to memorize. Hundreds. If modern students complain about memorizing multiplication tables, they would absolutely faint at your homework. Your teacher, a stern scribe with surprisingly delicate hands, would dictate long lists of signs while you knelt on the floor, stylus poised. Over and over, you copied legal formulas, hymns, and incantations. In mainstream historical understanding, literacy in ancient Mesopotamia was limited to a small professional class, scribes, priests, administrators. By becoming literate, you stepped into an elite world of knowledge. Words were not just communication, they were power. To write something down was to anchor it in reality. But you did not study only writing. You studied omens. Clay tablets cataloged strange occurrences with almost obsessive detail. If a man's right eye twitches, it means, followed by predictions that range from favorable fortune to impending doom. These omen texts, part of massive compendiums compiled over centuries, formed the backbone of your diagnostic process. Historians still argue whether these were used strictly as reference manuals, or if they functioned more like symbolic guides, open to interpretation depending on the situation. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between rigid rulebook and inspired improvisation. You pause briefly at the edge of a courtyard, where an older priest sweeps the ground with a bundle of reeds. He nods at you, a quiet acknowledgement of shared vocation. There are different types of ritual specialists in your world. The Baru reads omens from sacrificed animals, especially the liver, a practice called extispacy. You, as an Ashipu, specialize in incantations and ritual purification. Think of it as ancient interdisciplinary teamwork, minus the staff meetings.
You remember the first time you were allowed to observe a liver divination. The animal's liver was carefully examined for markings and anomalies, each bump and ridge compared to clay models used for training. Yes, there are clay livers with labeled sections, ancient anatomical flashcards. A quirky detail that always makes you smile. Some of these models are so detailed that modern archaeologists can still read the inscriptions, point paths of the gods across the organ. It's both unsettling and oddly academic.
Your own path, however, focused on words. Incantations had to be memorized with precision. A misplaced word could, in theory, render a ritual ineffective. Whether demons truly care about grammar is an open question, but you are not eager to test it. You learn to chant in Sumerian, a language already ancient in your time, because many sacred texts are preserved in that venerable tongue. It is a bit like a modern doctor learning Latin terminology. It sounds impressive, and it connects you to centuries of tradition. As you turn down another narrow lane, you pass a small shrine embedded in a wall, dedicated to a household god. Offerings of breadcrumbs and dates sit on a clay dish. You recall the first time your teacher explained the hierarchy of spirits. Major gods like Marduk and Ishtar, then lesser deities, then demons, beings like Lamashtu, blamed for harming infants, or Pazuzu, paradoxically invoked to ward her off. The cosmology is crowded. It's less a neat pyramid and more a bustling spiritual marketplace. You once asked your teacher in a whisper whether every fever was truly the work of a demon. He looked at you for a long moment before replying that the gods work through many channels. It was not quite an answer, but it was enough. Historians still argue whether practitioners like you blurred the line between magic and early medicine, using ritual alongside practical remedies like herbs, poultices, and careful observation of symptoms. From where you stand, the distinction feels less important than the outcome. If the patient improves, the method is justified. Your apprenticeship also involved performance. Yes, performance. You practiced speaking slowly, clearly, allowing your voice to rise and fall in controlled cadence. An incantation is not muttered, it is delivered. There is rhythm to it, almost musical. You learned when to pause for effect, when to sprinkle water, when to hold up a figurine so the afflicted could see the spirit symbolically trapped within it. A little theater never hurts, especially when your audience is terrified.
You reach the main thoroughfare now, where merchants are setting up stalls of barley, onions, and woven textiles. A few glance at you with curiosity. Your reputation rests not only on knowledge, but on memory. You can recall case after case. The child who stopped screaming after a night ritual. The farmer whose nightmares ceased after you buried a clay figurine at the crossroads. Whether coincidence or divine intervention, stories travel fast. And yet, beneath your confidence lies humility. You know that not every ritual succeeds. Sometimes a sickness worsens despite your best incantations. In those moments, you consult your tablets again, searching for a missed sign, a forgotten detail. The ancient texts are vast, compiled over generations. They are less a single book and more a living archive of trial and error. You adjust the pouch of herbs at your belt and feel the reassuring weight of the clay tablets tucked safely in a leather wrap. Your training has prepared you not only to confront demons, but to navigate doubt. Your clients' doubts,
and occasionally your own.
The sun climbs higher, casting long shadows that shrink by the minute. Somewhere ahead, a messenger hurries down the street, scanning faces. You recognize that look. The urgent, slightly panicked search for someone who deals in the invisible. Your education, your memorized incantations, your careful handwriting pressed into clay, all of it is about to be put to use again.
The messenger spots you before you can pretend to be deeply fascinated by a basket of onions. He hurries forward, breath slightly ragged, tunic askew, eyes darting as though the demon in question might be loitering behind a pottery stall. "Master Ashipu," he says, lowering his voice, "my employer requests your presence. It is urgent." Of course it is. No one ever sends for you to celebrate how wonderfully normal their morning is going.
You nod, serene, as though urgency is simply another spice in your day. Inside, you are already sorting through possibilities. Fever, nightmares, a curse from a rival merchant. The messenger leads you through winding lanes toward a respectable courtyard house near the market district. The mudbrick walls are plastered and whitewashed, a sign of modest prosperity. This is not a palace, but it is no hovel either. As you step through the doorway, the air shifts. It is heavy, not just with heat, but with tension. A woman stands near a low bed, wringing her hands. A man, broad-shouldered and clearly accustomed to bargaining loudly in the market, now looks uncharacteristically small. On the bed lies their teenage son, eyes half open, muttering to himself. You pause just inside the threshold. In Mesopotamian belief, thresholds matter. Spirits, like uninvited guests, are thought to linger at doorways and corners. You quietly sprinkle a few drops of water from your clay vessel onto the ground, murmuring a short incantation for protection. Mainstream historical tablets show that ritual purification with water was a standard first step in many ceremonies. Clean space, clean start. The father steps forward. He has not slept, he whispers. He speaks to someone who is not there. He says a shadow stands at the foot of his bed. Ah, shadows. Always a classic. You approach the boy slowly. His skin is warm, his breathing uneven. He turns his head toward you, eyes unfocused. "It watches," he murmurs. "It waits." You resist the urge to glance dramatically over your shoulder. Professionalism is key. You sit beside the bed and begin your assessment. In your world, diagnosis is a blend of observation and interpretation. You note the boy's pulse at his neck, the dryness of his lips, the faint tremor in his fingers. Historians still argue whether practitioners like you could distinguish between the psychological distress, neurological illness, and what you would call demonic influence. You cannot name neurons or pathogens, but you can recognize patterns.
When did this begin? Did he eat something unusual? Has he quarreled with anyone? Has the family neglected any offerings to their household gods?
The mother admits that 3 nights ago her son argued fiercely with a neighbor's boy. Harsh words were exchanged. Accusations of envy. Your ears perk up. Accusations of envy often lead to suspicions of witchcraft. And in your professional handbook, the long incantation series against sorcery, envy is practically the opening chapter. You withdraw a small clay figurine from your pouch, roughly shaped like a human form. You place it on a low stool near the bed. This, you explain gently, will carry what troubles him. The father watches with wide eyes. Performance, remember, not deception, just reassurance wrapped in symbolism. You light a pinch of juniper in a shallow dish. Smoke curls upward, fragrant and slightly sharp. The room fills with its scent, mingling with sweat and baked brick. You begin to chant, your voice low and rhythmic, drawing from memory lines you practiced for years. The words are in Sumerian, ancient even now. They call upon protective deities to drive out whatever malevolent force lingers. a quirky tidbit that would amuse a modern observer. Some incantations describe demons in oddly specific terms, like bureaucrats of misfortune, assigned to cause headaches or insomnia. There is even a category of spirits blamed for toothaches. You imagine them filing paperwork in the underworld. It helps keep the fear manageable.
The boy stirs as the smoke thickens. You dip your fingers into water and sprinkle droplets slightly across his forehead. Then you hold the figurine over his chest and recite a transfer spell, symbolically moving the affliction into the clay form.
The mother gasps softly when the boy's muttering quiets. Coincidence? The natural ebb of fever? Or the power of ritual focusing his restless mind? Historians still argue whether the psychological effect of ceremony played a significant role in perceived cures. You suspect that when a family believes the proper steps have been taken, a certain calm settles over them, and sometimes that calm is half the cure.
You instruct the father to bury the figurine at a crossroads outside the city walls before sunset. Crossroads are liminal spaces, neither here nor there, perfect for abandoning unwanted spirits. You also leave behind a small amulet inscribed with protective symbols to be hung above the boy's bed.
But you are not reckless. You quietly advise the mother to ensure her son drinks water mixed with crushed dates and a pinch of salt to restore strength. A practical remedy disguised within ritual instruction. No need to advertise that you care about hydration.
As you step back into the courtyard, the father presses a small pouch of barley and silver into your hand. Payment is not just compensation, it is confirmation that your role is valued. In ancient Mesopotamia, exorcists were recognized professionals, often attached to temples or even royal courts. Your work carries social weight. You exit into the street once more, the sun now high and unapologetic. Behind you, the house feels lighter. Whether you have banished a demon or simply eased a family's fear, the result is tangible. And as you walk away, the scent of juniper still clinging to your robe, you cannot help but wonder, just briefly, what truly stood at the foot of that boy's bed. The street feels brighter after the dim hush of the merchant's house, and for a moment you let the sunlight warm your shoulders. The juniper smoke still clings faintly to your robe, a traveling cloud of authority. You move toward a shaded alcove near the temple district, where you often pause between summonses. It is here, on a low stone bench worn smooth by decades of thoughtful backsides, that you unwrap your leather bundle of tablets. The clay is cool beneath your fingers, each tablet etched with rows of careful wedges. These are not casual notes. They are excerpts from vast collections of diagnostic and ritual texts compiled over generations. One well-known series, recorded by scribes centuries before you, systematically lists symptoms and their corresponding supernatural causes. If a man is ill and his skin burns and he sees shadows at night, it goes on, line after line, like an ancient medical database, minus the search bar. You tilt one tablet toward the light, tracing the impressions with your thumb. Mainstream scholarship tells us that Mesopotamian diagnostic texts were remarkably organized, sometimes following a head-to-toe structure when describing symptoms. You appreciate the logic of that. Start at the skull, work your way down. Even demons, apparently, prefer orderly documentation. A young apprentice from the temple approaches, carrying a small basket of fresh clay. He bows slightly and sets it beside you. "For new inscriptions," he says. You nod. Fresh clay means new cases, new observations. The archive is never finished. You think back to the boy in the merchant's house, the fever, the muttering, the mention of a shadow. Was it truly witchcraft, a spirit of the night, or perhaps a sickness carried by stagnant water or spoiled grain? Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian healers differentiated between what we would call infectious disease and psychological distress. The truth is, you rely on patterns. If multiple households report similar symptoms after a flood, you may suspect the river rather than a curse.
but you will still frame your response in ritual language. It is the shared vocabulary of your world. You reach into your pouch and withdraw a small lump of clay. With practiced movements, you shape it into a crude human figure. This is not for a current ritual, but for demonstration. Practice keeps the hands nimble. You use the tip of your stylus to mark simple eyes and a line for a mouth. These figurines, used in transfer rituals, are sometimes buried, sometimes burned, sometimes dissolved in water. A quirky detail: some texts instruct you to fashion figurines representing witches or demons and then subject them to symbolic punishments, binding them, spitting on them, even melting them in fire. It is ritual theater with a surprisingly cathartic edge. You pause, imagining future archaeologists uncovering one of your discarded figurines and puzzling over its meaning. Was this art, they might ask, or evidence of fear? The answer, of course, is both. A woman approaches hesitantly, holding a small cloth bundle. She does not yet speak, simply waits at a respectful distance. You finish pressing a final wedge into the clay and set it aside to dry. Diagnosis requires attention, and attention requires calm. She steps forward and unwraps the bundle, revealing a tiny amulet made of baked clay. Its surface bears the image of a grotesque face, wide eyes, bared teeth, wings flaring outward. You recognize it immediately: Pazuzu, the wind demon often invoked to ward off the child-snatching Lamashtu. The irony is never lost on you. To fight one demon, you enlist another. "My sister's child is ill," the woman says softly. "We hung this above his cradle, but he still cries through the night." You take the amulet in your hand. Its edges are worn smooth, evidence of anxious fingers rubbing it for reassurance. In mainstream historical understanding, such protective amulets were common across Mesopotamia, especially for infants. The fear of infant mortality is universal and timeless. You examine the carving closely. The craftsmanship is decent, though not temple grade. "Has the child been feverish?" you ask. She nods. "And restless. He startles at every sound." You consider the possibilities. Fever again, perhaps the season's heat, perhaps infection. But in the language of your profession, this could be the touch of Lamashtu, a demoness blamed for harming newborns. Some incantations describe her vividly: lion-headed, donkey-toothed, prowling at night. Whether such imagery reflects literal belief or metaphorical explanation is a matter historians still debate. For the family, the fear is real either way. You instruct the woman to place a small bowl of clean water beneath the amulet and to wash the child's hands and face gently at sunset while reciting a simple protective phrase you teach her. It is not a full exorcism, just reinforcement. You also advise her to ensure the child's sleeping area is well ventilated. Again, practical care wrapped in sacred instruction. As she leaves, gratitude softening her features, you feel the quiet weight of your role. You are interpreter, counselor, ritualist. Sometimes you suspect you are also something like a therapist, though the word does not exist. People come to you with fears shaped by gods and demons, and you translate those fears into actions they can take. You return to your tablets and begin inscribing a brief note about the merchant's son. Young male, fever, night visions, juniper fumigation performed, figurine buried. The clay receives your marks without judgment. Recording cases is not only for memory, it is for continuity. The knowledge must outlive you. A breeze drifts through the alley, carrying the scent of baking bread and distant river water. You lift your eyes toward the sky, scanning for unusual cloud patterns or birds flying erratically. Omens are everywhere, if one looks closely enough. Some scholars in your future will marvel at the sheer volume of omen literature produced in your era. Thousands upon thousands of recorded signs, from eclipses to malformed lamps.
It suggests a culture deeply invested in reading meaning into the world. And yet, as you sit in the warm shade, stylus in hand, you feel less like a mystic and more like a careful observer. You watch, you listen, you compare, you decide.
The day is not yet half done, and already the invisible threads of illness, fear, and hope weave through your path. You smooth the surface of a fresh tablet, ready for whatever diagnosis comes next, knowing that in this city of mudbrick and gods, knowledge is both shield and lantern.
You wrap your tablets once more and rise from the shaded alcove, stepping back into the full brightness of midday. The market is now in full voice. Barley sacks thump against the ground. Goats protest their temporary unemployment. Merchants call out prices with theatrical enthusiasm, as though louder volume might persuade the gods of commerce themselves. You move through the crowd at an unhurried pace, and people notice. Some nod respectfully. Others glance away a bit too quickly. Your profession inspires both comfort and unease. After all, if you can banish a demon, perhaps you can also identify who sent it. A fishmonger grins at you as you pass. "Master of spirits," he calls, half joking. "Care to rid me of customers who won't pay?" You lift an eyebrow. "That would require a more powerful demon than I command."
A ripple of laughter spreads through the nearby stalls. Humor is useful currency. In a society where illness, drought, and war are constant threats, a well-timed joke can steady nerves. Besides, even an Ashipu benefits from appearing approachable. You are not a cloaked oracle on a mountain. You are part of the daily rhythm of the city.
Mainstream historical records show that exorcists often held official positions, sometimes attached to temples and even to royal courts. You are not merely a wandering mystic. You belong to a recognized professional class. Your training in literacy and ritual grants you status, and status, in turn, shapes how people treat you in public spaces like this.
You pause at a stall selling copper amulets. Small discs etched with protective symbols glint in the sun. The craftsman bows slightly and shows you a new design, a stylized eye framed by curling lines meant to ward off envy. The fear of the evil eye is widespread in your world. A single jealous glance, it is believed, can sour milk or weaken a child. "Do you think it will work?" the craftsman asks. You consider the amulet, turning it between your fingers. "If the wearer believes it will," you reply carefully, "it strengthens the protection." Historians still argue whether belief itself played a measurable role in ancient healing practices. Was it ritual alone that calmed the sick, or the shared conviction that the ritual mattered? You suspect the mind is as powerful a battlefield as any haunted threshold. A small commotion draws your attention near a date seller's stall. Two men argue, voices sharp. One accuses the other of cheating him with false weights. The word curse is tossed into the air like an extra insult. You do not intervene immediately. Accusations of sorcery can escalate quickly. You step closer, your robe brushing against woven baskets. "Gentlemen," you say evenly, "if there is suspicion of wrongdoing, it can be examined properly." The mere suggestion of formal examination, of omens, of ritual inquiry, makes them pause. No one truly wants the gods scrutinizing their business practices. The accuser mutters something about a misunderstanding, and the argument dissolves into grumbling. You move on, resisting the urge to smile too broadly. Sometimes your power lies in potential rather than action. You pass a group of children chasing each other between stalls, their laughter high and bright. One boy stops abruptly when he sees you, staring at the small clay figurine tucked into your belt from earlier practice. "Is that a demon?" he whispers. "Only if it misbehaves," you reply. He looks unconvinced but delighted. Children, you have learned, are both the most frightened and the most fascinated by your work. The heat intensifies as the sun climbs overhead.
You feel sweat gathering beneath your linen headband. You stop at a well and draw up a small jar of water, sipping slowly. Hydration may not be inscribed on your tablets in dramatic script, but you have learned its quiet importance. Even exorcists can faint. A scholar from the temple approaches, carrying a tablet under his arm. He greets you with formal politeness. There is discussion, he says, about a recent eclipse. Some interpret it as a warning for the king.
Ah, eclipses. In Mesopotamian omen literature, celestial events are serious business. Entire texts are devoted to interpreting the movements of the sun and moon. A darkened sky can signal danger for rulers, prompting elaborate substitute king rituals in which a temporary stand-in absorbs the predicted misfortune. You nod thoughtfully. And what is your view?
He shrugs. Historians, he catches himself, then smiles at the irony of the word. Our scholars still argue whether every eclipse portends disaster or whether context matters. You chuckle softly. Even in your era, debate thrives. Knowledge is not static. It is argued over in shaded courtyards and scribal rooms. You promise to review the relevant omen texts later. For now, the market hums, and your presence here maintains visibility. Reputation must be tended like a garden.
A woman selling woven reed mats presses a small offering into your hand, a handful of figs. For your protection, she says. You accept graciously. Gifts reinforce bonds. In return, you murmur a brief blessing over her stall, invoking prosperity and fair trade. It costs you nothing but breath, yet it may return loyalty tenfold. As the afternoon stretches on, you become aware of the subtle duality of your existence. You walk among ordinary transactions, barter, gossip, laughter, yet you are constantly attuned to whispers of the unseen. A cough held too long, a glance too sharp, a sudden gust of wind that rattles hanging charms. A quirky detail lingers in your mind. Some texts describe demons as traveling on the wind, slipping through cracks and under doors. You glance at a curtain fluttering in a doorway and imagine invisible travelers hitching a ride. It is both eerie and strangely poetic. The market begins to thin as the hottest part of the day settles in. Merchants retreat into shade, customers disperse to cool interiors. You stand for a moment at the edge of the square, feeling the pulse of the city slow slightly. Your reputation today has been reinforced, not through grand spectacle, but through steady presence. You have mediated tension, advised on protection, listened to scholarly debate. You are both feared and trusted, doubted and depended upon. And as you turn toward the upper district, where wealthier homes rise behind higher walls, you sense that the day's most delicate test may still lie ahead. You leave the thinning market behind and make your way toward the upper district, where the streets widen and the mudbrick walls grow taller, smoother, more carefully plastered. Here, wealth gathers like shade beneath an awning. Courtyards are larger. Doorways are framed with carved wood. Even the donkeys seem slightly more dignified. A servant waits at the entrance of a particularly grand house, pacing just beyond the threshold. The moment he sees you, he bows low. "Master Ashipu," he says, voice tight. "My lord requests you at once." You incline your head, adjusting your robe so it falls neatly. Urgency again, but this kind is different. In modest homes, fear hums quietly. In wealthy ones, it vibrates with consequences. You step through the doorway into a spacious courtyard with a central pool reflecting the late afternoon light. Potted palms line the walls. The air smells faintly of incense and something sharper, anxiety. A tall man in fine linen approaches. His beard is oiled, his posture rigid. You recognize him, a minor noble, an administrator tied to the temple bureaucracy. His decisions affect trade routes, grain storage, perhaps even taxation. And today, his composure is fraying.
My wife has been afflicted, he says, skipping formal pleasantries. She wakes screaming. She claims a presence sits upon her chest at night, stealing her breath. You nod slowly. The description is familiar. Across centuries, people will report similar sensations, what modern minds might call sleep paralysis. But in your world, it may be the work of a night demon, pressing down upon the vulnerable. Show me, you say gently. He leads you through a shaded hallway into a cool interior chamber. The noblewoman reclines on a low couch, attended by 2 servants fanning her with woven reeds. Her face is pale, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. You approach quietly, lowering your gaze in respect. My lady, you murmur, tell me what you experience. She swallows. It comes when I drift to sleep. I cannot move. I cannot call out. It sits here, she presses her hand to her chest, and whispers that I am cursed. The room feels smaller somehow. You observe her carefully. No visible fever, breathing steady now, though shallow. You ask about recent events, conflicts, changes in household routine, offerings neglected. The noble shifts uncomfortably when you mention offerings. A flicker of tension passes between husband and wife.
Mainstream historical records show that high-ranking households often maintained personal shrines and were expected to perform regular rituals to honor patron deities. Failure to do so might be interpreted as inviting divine displeasure. Whether the true cause lies in neglected offerings or the heavy burdens of elite life, you cannot say with certainty. Historians still argue whether practitioners like you privately recognized stress and anxiety as underlying factors in such cases, even while publicly framing them as spiritual attacks. You suspect that power carries its own demons: responsibility, rivalry, expectation. You request a basin of clean water, fine flour, and a small brazier for burning incense. The servants hurry to comply. In a wealthy house, materials appear quickly. That too is a form of power. From your pouch, you withdraw a small clay tablet inscribed with protected incantations against night spirits. You position yourself near the head of her couch and begin to chant, your voice steady and low. The cadence fills the chamber, rising and falling, like the Euphrates at dusk. You instruct the servants to draw a protective line of flour around the couch's base, a symbolic boundary no spirit should cross. It is simple, visible, reassuring. A quirky detail from your training surfaces in your mind. Some ancient texts recommend placing specific objects under the bed, figurines of protective deities, even small metal blades to deter nocturnal entities. You consider suggesting a bronze dagger beneath the couch, not because you believe a demon fears cutlery, but because tangible defenses calm human hearts. As the incense smoke curls upward, you hold a small amulet carved with the image of Pazuzu over the noblewoman's chest. Again, the paradox: a demon enlisted to fight a demon. The cosmology of your world is nothing if not creatively layered. You recite a longer incantation now, invoking powerful gods: Marduk, champion of order; Ea, lord of wisdom and fresh waters. Your voice echoes softly against plastered walls. The noble stands nearby, arms crossed tightly, as though bracing against unseen wind. At the incantation's climax, you dip your fingers into the basin and flick droplets lightly over the noblewoman's brow and chest. She closes her eyes. Her breathing deepens. You lower your voice and address her directly. When the presence comes, you say calmly, you will remember this boundary. You will remember the flower circle, the amulet, the gods who guard you. You will breathe slowly. It cannot hold you. It is both ritual command and psychological anchor. There is silence for a moment after you finish. Even the servants seem to hold their breath. The noblewoman exhales slowly, shoulders relaxing just a fraction.
It feels lighter, she whispers. Whether the change is immediate or imagined hardly matters. In this room, perception shapes reality. The old noblewoman approaches you quietly. If this continues, he says, voice low, what then?
You meet his gaze steadily. Then we consult further texts. We examine omens. We leave no possibility unconsidered. You do not mention that some afflictions persist despite all ritual effort. In high-ranking households, failure has political weight. An unresolved curse could become rumor. Rumor could become accusation. Mainstream evidence shows that royal courts in Mesopotamia sometimes employed teams of exorcists and diviners, especially during ominous celestial events. Substitute kings were even installed temporarily if omens predicted danger to the ruler. In comparison, this household's crisis is intimate, but the stakes feel no less real.
The noble presses a generous payment into your hand, silver, finely measured. Wealth expects visible action, and you have provided it. As you step back into the courtyard, the sun has begun its slow descent, gilding the walls in warm light. The air feels softer now, less oppressive. You pause briefly beside the reflecting pool, watching ripples distort the sky's image. In houses like this, your role balances delicately between faith and performance, reassurance and authority. You must be precise with words, careful with gestures, attuned not only to spirits, but to politics.
And as you step back onto the street, silver weight at your belt and incense scent lingering in your hair, you feel the day bending toward evening and toward the kind of rituals that belong to darkness itself. As the Middle Ages gradually gave way to the early modern world, something subtle began to change. It was not the castles or the cathedrals at first. It was not the crowns or the banners. It was the way people thought about secrets.
For centuries, rumors had traveled faster than facts. A whispered accusation in a monastery corridor could become a kingdom-wide certainty within weeks. In an age without printing presses, without newspapers, without instant communication, truth often depended on authority rather than evidence. If a bishop declared something dangerous, it became dangerous. If a king insisted a plot existed, the plot was real enough to punish. But beginning in the late medieval period, cracks formed in this pattern. After the exposure of the corruption surrounding the sale of indulgences, a practice most famously challenged by Martin Luther, many Europeans began questioning not just religious authority, but authority itself. When Luther publicly criticized the church in 1517, he was not inventing new suspicions. He was giving voice to whispers that had existed for generations. The conspiracy had been real. The exploitation had been real. And now it was written down, printed, distributed. The printing press transformed conspiracy in a way swords never could. Before print, secrecy thrived in silence. After print, accusations could circulate in thousands of identical copies. Ironically, this both exposed genuine corruption and fueled wild new rumors. The medieval world had been built on limited access to information. Only a small percentage of the population could read Latin. Legal documents were stored in monasteries or royal archives. Financial records were private. If a nobleman claimed innocence, few could verify it. But as literacy slowly expanded and records became more accessible, some conspiracies became harder to sustain. Corruption did not vanish, but it became more traceable. Paper left trails. Consider the fate of the Knights Templar once more. When modern historians examined the records surrounding their arrest under Philip IV of France, patterns emerged. Debts owed by the crown, confessions extracted under torture, property seized and redistributed. The conspiracy theory that the Templars were heretics faded under scrutiny. In its place stood a clearer, colder truth: political convenience. This shift did not happen overnight. For centuries, trials still relied on forced confessions. Kings still manipulated narratives, but gradually, evidence began to matter more than accusation. In cities like Florence and Venice, merchant republics developed bureaucratic systems that recorded contracts, debts, and trade agreements. Financial transparency, even if imperfect, reduced the mystery surrounding wealth. Suspicion could be tested against ledgers.
Similarly, in England, the development of parliamentary oversight slowly altered how royal finances were scrutinized. While corruption certainly persisted, the idea that rulers could be questioned, even limited, marked a profound change from earlier centuries. Yet, not all conspiracies vanished. Some merely evolved.
Blood libels against Jewish communities, which had erupted during the medieval period, persisted long after they were repeatedly disproven. Witchcraft accusations continued into the early modern era. Fear does not disappear simply because documentation improves. But there was a difference now. Opposition voices could publish rebuttals. Scholars could examine original texts. Courts could review records. The growth of universities played a quiet but essential role in this transformation. Institutions such as the University of Paris and the University of Oxford trained scholars in logic, law, and theology. Debate was formalized. Argument required structure. Evidence gained value. It was not perfect. It was not always fair. But the cultural assumption that authority could be wrong began to take root. In this new environment, medieval conspiracies did not vanish. They became case studies. Historians began to revisit earlier accusations. Were the Cathars truly devil worshippers, as church authorities had claimed? Or were they simply religious dissenters, crushed during the Albigensian Crusade? Surviving records suggested exaggeration. Some accusations seemed politically motivated, rather than theologically urgent.
Even the idea of secret poisoners, once blamed for unexplained deaths in royal courts, became less convincing as medical understanding improved. Disease patterns could be studied, plague could be tracked. Not every sudden death required a hidden assassin.
The Black Death itself, which had once inspired conspiracy theories about wells being poisoned, eventually became understood as a biological catastrophe rather than coordinated malice. Though medieval communities blamed minorities and outsiders, later analysis traced the spread of plague through trade routes and rodent populations. In this way, knowledge slowly dissolved some of the shadows, and yet, the human mind remained the same. People still feared betrayal. They still suspected hidden motives. They still believed that powerful institutions operated beyond public view. What changed was not suspicion, but tools. Archives grew. Printing multiplied, literacy spread, courts formalized procedures, financial records became increasingly detailed. Historians, centuries later, would sift through these materials to reconstruct events more accurately than any medieval chronicler could have imagined.
Some medieval conspiracies turned out to be tragically real. Corruption in the church, political manipulation of trials, financial schemes hidden behind religious language. Others were fabrications, born from fear, prejudice, and limited understanding. The Middle Ages did not invent conspiracy, nor did they perfect it. They simply lived in a world where secrecy was easier to maintain and harder to challenge. As the Middle World faded, it left behind more than castles and manuscripts. It left lessons. It taught that power often hides its motives behind moral language. It showed how fear can be weaponized. It revealed how authority can manufacture guilt. But it also demonstrated something else, that over time, truth has a stubborn habit of resurfacing.
The exposure of indulgence abuses, the re-examination of the Templars' downfall, the revision of accusations against minority groups. These were not sudden awakenings. They were slow corrections. History rarely shouts. It corrects quietly. And so, as we drift toward the end of our exploration of medieval conspiracies that turned out to be true, we are left with a gentle reminder. The past is not a distant land of superstition alone. It is a mirror,
In its shadowed corridors, we see how secrecy operates. In its exposed scandals, we see how truth eventually emerges. In its false accusations, we see the cost of fear. And perhaps most importantly, we see that every age believes it has uncovered all deception, until time reveals otherwise. The medieval world slept beneath torchlight and cathedral bells, beneath whispered rumors and royal proclamations. We sleep beneath electric lights and digital screens.
But the quiet question remains the same. What truths are still waiting to be uncovered? And which whispers, centuries from now, will historians finally confirm were real? For now, the torches dim, the parchment rolls closed, the conspiracies, both proven and imagined, settle into the long archive of history. And in the stillness, we rest.
By now, the torches in our imagined medieval hallways burn lower. The banners hang still. The murmurs of courtiers and monks have faded into the cool stone walls. The conspiracies that once seemed enormous, terrifying, divine, world-ending, settle into something softer when viewed from a distance of centuries. What remains is not outrage, it is understanding. When we look back at the downfall of the Knights Templar under the rule of Philip IV of France, we no longer see demonic rituals whispered in candlelight. We see debt. We see political calculation. We see a king using fear to solve a financial problem.
When we revisit the indulgence controversies that later inspired Martin Luther, we do not see abstract theology alone. We see human institutions growing comfortable with power, drifting from their ideals, and being forced, eventually, to confront the gap between belief and behavior. When historians re-examine the suppression of the Cathars during the Albigensian Crusade, they often find exaggeration in the official charges. Labels like heretic or devil worshipper once silenced entire communities. Today, many scholars interpret those accusations as tools of political consolidation rather than literal descriptions of secret evil.
Even the tragedies of the Black Death, which swept through Europe in the 14th century, remind us how quickly fear can invent enemies. Jewish communities were accused of poisoning wells. Foreigners were blamed. Invisible plots were imagined. And yet, centuries later, epidemiology and careful record-keeping revealed a different story. Bacteria carried by fleas, trade routes spreading infection, a natural catastrophe misunderstood. In each case, something important happens with time. The drama drains away, the panic dissolves, and what remains is a pattern. Power protects itself. Fear seeks a target. And truth, though delayed, often leaves evidence behind.
The medieval world was not uniquely conspiratorial. It was simply limited. Limited by slow communication, limited by restricted literacy, limited by centralized authority. In such an environment, secrecy was easy to maintain, and accusations were difficult to challenge. If a king declared a military order corrupt, who could publicly disagree? If church officials labeled a belief heretical, how could ordinary villagers evaluate the claim? If plagues struck without explanation, what alternative to blame existed? Today, we sometimes imagine that our age is the first to wrestle with misinformation or institutional corruption. But the Middle Ages remind us that these struggles are ancient.
The difference lies in our tools. Modern archives, scientific methods, open debate, and global communication make concealment more complicated, though never impossible. The medieval record shows us both sides of this truth. Yes, conspiracies existed. Financial exploitation happened. Political manipulation shaped trials. Religious authority was abused. But false conspiracies flourished too. Entire populations suffered because suspicion felt more satisfying than uncertainty. And here, as our journey winds down, There is something unexpectedly calming about this realization. Human nature has not changed dramatically.
We still fear what we do not understand. We still distrust concentrated power. We still construct narratives to make sense of chaos. The medieval past does not judge us for this. It simply reflects us. If we imagine a monk in the 13th century copying manuscripts by hand, he likely believed he lived in extraordinary times. Times of crisis, corruption, hidden dangers. And in many ways he did. Yet from our distance, his world feels quiet, predictable, contained within parchment and stone.
One day, centuries from now, our own era may seem just as still. Our headlines may appear like echoes in a vast archive. Our scandals may be summarized in calm academic language. What feels urgent now will feel studied then. There is comfort in that. The conspiracies that turned out to be true remind us that vigilance matters. Institutions must be questioned. Power must be examined. Records must be preserved. The conspiracies that turned out to be false remind us that fear can wound the innocent, that suspicion without evidence can destroy communities, that uncertainty is not proof of hidden evil. Both lessons are gentle when viewed in the long arc of history.
The medieval bells that once rang in alarm now rang only in memory. The trials, the accusations, the dramatic proclamations, they exist as ink on pages, and ink, over time, fades into soft brown lines. So as the night deepens around us, imagine those stone corridors once more, the flicker of candles against carved arches, the distant echo of footsteps across a cloister. Somewhere, a whispered rumor begins its journey, and somewhere else, a record is written. Centuries later, a historian will compare the two. That is how truth survives, not through noise, but through patience.
As we settle into the quiet, let your breathing slow with the rhythm of these old stories. The Middle Ages were neither purely dark nor brightly enlightened. They were human, filled with ambition, faith, greed, kindness, error, and hope. Conspiracies rose and fell. Some were exposed quickly. Others took generations to unravel. A few still invite debate. But the pattern remains steady. Secrets rarely stay buried forever. Time is the patient investigator. It waits. It gathers fragments. It compares testimonies. It notices contradictions. And eventually, softly, it reveals. Now the torches dim completely. The castle doors close. The manuscripts rest in their chests. Outside, the medieval night stretches wide and calm beneath a sky untouched by electric light. No accusations echo now. No royal decrees interrupt the silence. Only the slow turning of centuries. And in that long, quiet turning, truth finds its way, as it always has, into the light. Rest here for a moment in that stillness. Let the old conspiracies drift like distant embers. History keeps watch, and for tonight, that is enough. End of script. Sweet dreams.